Obligatory, this happened 12 years ago when I was 17. I'm a female and 29 now. I'm a very avid reader of this sub. I hope this is a good enough story. On mobile though, so sorry for any errors. I grew up in a smallish North Alabama college town that had two types of people, drunk and rowdy college kids, and the old retired family folk. There was hardly any middle ground. It was regarded as relatively safe, but we still locked our doors and closed the curtains tight at night. And this town was part of a Tri-Cities type area, where there were two smaller little towns right across the river about 10 minutes away. One of those neighboring towns had super amazing hiking trails that weaved beautifully through the old woods, with trails to rocky beaches down by the water, and up to high bluffs with caves and waterfalls. It was truly a great stretch of wilderness. There are even the skeletons of a few old plantations / probably slave houses, 'cause it's Alabama, that the land-owning government body is fenced off. I imagine those buildings are a liability because of people like me. I thought they were super cool and creepy, and loved to poke around for old forgotten treasures. Along the 7.5-mile hiking trails, there were 3 parking lots before a river dam at the very end. I was familiar with all 3 of these lots, and the trails connecting and surrounding them. This story takes place at lot number 2, right in the middle. For the life of me, I can't exactly remember the exact time of year. The trees were still green, but barely, and I was wearing a tank top and yoga pants, so it couldn't have been that cold yet. I remember it was an extremely pretty day, and the woods were calling to me as they often do. I had asked my best friend M to meet me at lot 2, because there was a decaying house only about 30 meters off the lot, completely obscured by trees and just off the trail. You literally could not even tell a building was there until you walked up upon it. I wanted to show it to her and play around in the woods for a while to burn the rest of the day away. It was either early afternoon on the weekend or right after school. I can't quite remember. I arrived at the lot before her, parked my car near the back maybe 3 spaces away from this baby blue car with a hatchback. I could see someone in the driver's seat sitting there, but it's not unusual for a few other people to be there. There were a couple of other cars parked as well, though they were empty. I didn't look over at the person. I don't like to invite other people's eyeballs over to me, or vice versa. I was driving a 2002 Ford Fusion at the time, and thank God the car locks the doors automatically when you get in drive, and does not unlock them after you park unless you hit that button yourself. This feature alone is quite possibly why I was able to avoid a worse outcome here. I didn't want to wait for Em in the woods where she couldn't see me, so I just slouched down in my seat, rolled my window down halfway, and turned some music on to wait for her. After probably not even 5 minutes after I parked though, I watched the man exit the blue car out of the corner of my eye. I already thought it was weird that he was sitting there for so long, so I was looking at my phone but remaining aware of my surroundings. I get paranoia from my father. Thanks. Now I was a dumb kid who, and really still kinda does, worry way too much about being rude or a bitch to other people, even when they're clearly overstepping. To this day it gets me in trouble, as I work with the general public. Perfect. I also had a very traumatic childhood, sprinkled with memories of police officers, domestic violence, and them dragging me back to the abusive parent I'd run away from because divorce paper requirements. At this time in my life I harbored a lot of hatred for the police. I generally believed they could not, and would not help me. This attitude is quite dangerous. This older man just meanders up to my cracked window, slowly, but not in a rush, not creeping exactly either. He's probably in his 60s, decently thin, but not exactly frail looking. Starts up about what a pretty day it is, and that he's glad I'm out enjoying it. I was uncomfortable long before this moment, but my dumbass responds in kind, shortly but politely, still looking down at my phone. I don't think I ever looked directly at this man's face the whole time, actually. Yeah, I love the sunshine. Me too. 20 seconds of very tense silence. Those pants sure look comfortable. They are. He was just standing there, staring me down, when suddenly, I bet you got a nice pussy. I bet it's good for licking. Whoa there, motherfucker. You guys, I literally said nothing. I couldn't move or breathe or even think really. I was just so surprised. I couldn't even reach my arm over to roll the window up. That petrified teenage girl just sat there, frantically sending all caps texts to M, either my mom or dad, and 2 other male friends. No one replied to the desperate, "Call me right now, please." Fuck my life. I felt myself get hot and nauseated. My armpits started to sweat and roll down my arms. I felt my heartbeat jump into my throat, and my mouth went dry so I couldn't respond even if I wanted to. Not once did it occur to me to call the police. Not throughout this entire 10-minute ordeal did I ever think to seek help from them, which was unfortunate. I was very lucky, so I didn't say anything. I didn't look up, but I was intently watching him still. There was a tense silence. "How about we go somewhere?" "No thanks, I'm waiting for my boyfriend. He's almost here," I lied. I knew that M wasn't near her phone because she wasn't responding to me, so she probably wasn't even on her way there yet, and her house was 20 minutes out. No one was coming for me. I bet we could go and get back before he gets here. More silence. Then I heard what was unmistakably a single, slow, stealthy pull on the door handle. Oh, thank Jesus. It was still locked. I was internally freaking out. Some pretty intense trembling was happening. I could feel my organs vibrate from it. "Are you sure? I'm a real gentleman. I'm sure you'd have a good time. I promise to have you back before your boyfriend gets here." I just sat there ignoring the harassment. Then, by some miracle of the universe, my mind reconnected with my body finally. I reached over, hit the manual lock on the passenger door, and I shot out into the parking lot and into the woods, knowing this man could never catch me. I was a lean 5'7" forest cat who basically lived in the trees of these woods. No chance in hell anyone would. I didn't look to see if he chased me. I ran into the tree, staying off trail, and doubled back to the dilapidated house close to the lot. I wanted to see where he was or if he was following me. I got onto what was left of the very unstable roof, but I couldn't see him or anything else in the parking lot. I laid down flat up there and waited on M. Still, no one had called me after those messages. Eventually, probably 20 minutes later, she calls me, saying she's finally on her way and asks if everything's okay. I completely broke down trying to tell her the story, and that we're staying on the phone until she gets there because everything was definitely not okay. We did, but the light blue car was long gone by the time she arrived. I never called the police, never reported this pervert, never saw him again, even though I never really avoided that lot. I was for years afterwards, always watching for that light blue car or anyone matching his physical description. I thank my lucky stars that car kept my doors locked, because that was not a habit of mine back then. I never thought about the importance of reporting these people until I was older. I regret not having called the police. I regret letting that man cause me as much fear as he did, and potentially go on to do God knows what. Always report these freaks. Always. If not for you, do it for the next victim, because there always will be one. To preface this, I love to drive. Like hours-long drives to nowhere in particular with no destination in mind. Just me, my music, and the road ahead of me. Living in Nebraska, I'd often take back roads or lonely highways, cutting through the countryside to small towns, and eventually cities. I'd usually take these drives at night, since there was a lot less traffic to worry about. I've done it since I had my license 4 or 5 years ago, and I've never once had any sort of issue, nor have I ever run into any trouble. That was until a few nights ago. For reference, I'm a relatively small 22-year-old female, and as I've stated before, I often take these drives completely and utterly alone. They're a good way to clear out my head when I'm stressed out, upset, or overwhelmed, or for me to get a plan together to sort personal issues out. I've also done these long and lonely drives to get away from the toxicity of my household when I used to live with my parents as a means of coping with their alcoholism. Though now that I've moved out and I'm in a much better place mentally, I don't really have the urge to get in my car and just drive anymore. However, on the night this event took place, I was feeling particularly overwhelmed, stressed, and anxious with a clusterfuck of personal issues I'd rather not get into. I felt restless and irritable around my boyfriend, couldn't focus on anything else. I decided I would take a drive to clear my head. My boyfriend was understanding and told me to be careful and not be gone for too terribly long since it was getting very late. I agreed, gave him a kiss goodbye, and left on my way. I drove around our city for about 30 minutes, but I was still feeling on edge about everything transpiring in my personal life, so I decided to drive further north, down those familiar, dark, and winding one-lane highways. I kept the car at a steady speed of 65 miles per hour, taking the turns at a slower pace in case a deer jumped out around the bend. I was just admiring the vast empty darkness of the snow-capped fields and barren trees. It was honestly a bit creepy being all alone with no cars in sight, seemingly in the middle of nowhere. The few houses miles back from the road were lightless, and the dead cornfields withered away and covered in snow. It was like something out of a horror movie, and I half expected to see a ghost pop up in my rearview mirror, or see someone clamber out from the patches of the trees dotting the horizon. By now it was just after 11, and I told myself that once I made the familiar roundabout that would either take you to a small town or back up towards the city, I would head back and go home. That roundabout was still maybe 15 to 25 minutes away though, but other than my imagination picturing the worst, I wasn't really all that concerned. I mean, I was by myself. I didn't have any other motorists to worry about, right? Wrong. As I'm rounding another bend, I notice a vehicle with its hazards flashing, maybe just a quarter of a mile or something away from me. It was some sort of sedan, dark-colored, and it was angled to where only part of it was on the shoulder, while the rest jutted out onto the road, like they had to pull over in a hurry, but didn't quite manage to do so. The driver's side door was flung wide open, and as I slowed my vehicle down and angled it towards the opposite side of the road to pass, I could make out what looked to be blood on the inside of the open door. I didn't see anyone on the road or in the car, and I was the only motorist in sight. Cell phone reception is spotty at best in this part of the country, but more often than not, you couldn't get reception no matter how hard you prayed, which was definitely the case when I took a glance at my phone to see if I had any service. So a lone female on the road at night, pulling up near a vacant vehicle that looks like someone had been attacked on the inside with no cell service. Now, I'm no dummy. I've watched countless episodes of Investigation Discovery and Criminal Minds, and read far too many true crime books to know that this had bad and danger written all over it. But there was still a small part of me that worried something terrible had happened to whoever was inside that vehicle, and I thought I needed to help. These roads don't exactly get a lot of traffic late at night, and temperatures were well below freezing. If someone was hurt or in trouble, there was no one and nothing else to help them except for me. Still, I erred on the side of caution. I was still driving my car, though a bit more slowly, and as I approached the vehicle, I rolled down my passenger window a bit, shut off the music, and called out, "Hey, anyone there? Are you okay?" I didn't hear a response. I worried maybe they were passed out somewhere, but I wasn't exactly about to get out and go search for them. I told myself I'd call out one last time, and if I didn't hear anything, I would leave. The moment there was reception, I would call it in, and if I did hear someone, well, I'd figure out my next course of action then. So again, I shout, "Hey, what happened? Are you okay?" There was silence for just a beat, and then I heard rustling in the shadows of the trees, followed by a gruff voice. "Yeah?" I was relieved at first and was about to say something in response, or possibly even stop my car and get out, when I noticed three things nearly simultaneously. As I inched my way past the front of the sedan, I noticed there was no damage to the hood or anyone else on the vehicle, which I found strange considering the blood on the inside of the door. In my rear view mirror, I caught a glance of someone coming out from behind the sedan, and they were making their way towards my car fast. The person didn't have any blood on them or appear injured in any way, wearing a mask. Not like a face mask for COVID or a ski mask or anything normal, but one of those masks you would see in the Purge movies, and they were holding something in their hand. I don't know what it was, I couldn't get a good look, but from its length and shape, my guess was maybe a tire iron or a crowbar. I don't need to tell you that I slammed on the gas the moment I noticed those things, and drove like a bat straight out of hell. My heart was thundering in my chest, and my entire body shaking. My window was still rolled down in my haste, and the music was still shut off, so I could clearly hear someone, definitely a man, shouting at me. Though I had no clue what they were trying to say, I just knew I had to get out of there immediately. I stole one last look in my rearview mirror as I drove away, mostly to see if they were getting in their sedan to follow me, or if they had stopped. The man with the weapon was still standing in the middle of the road watching me drive off, but right before I looked away from the mirror, I saw a second man emerge from the trees that had been rustling earlier, also wearing one of those creepy masks, but no trace of blood to be found. I probably broke every law for speeding that night, but I wanted to get as far away from those men as possible. As soon as I made it to the roundabout, I turned towards town, parked in the Walmart parking lot that thankfully still had cars from who I assumed were workers closing up shop, and proceeded to have a full-on meltdown. When I could pull myself together finally, I called one of my friends, T, who was a police officer, to tell him what happened and ask what I should do next. He was concerned for me, and after asking if I was okay, where I was, if they followed me, he told me that since it was out of city limits, he couldn't really do much on his end, but he could get in contact with the local police/sheriff in that jurisdiction to take my statement and check it out. I agreed, thanked him, and while I waited for police to show up, I called my boyfriend. Through my hysterical sobs and panic, I managed to tell him what happened not even 10 or so minutes ago. He was, as you could imagine, super freaked out for my safety and wanted me to either come home immediately or drive down himself to take me home. I told him the police were on their way to take my statement, so I couldn't leave, but I was okay. I stayed on the phone with him until I saw the familiar police cruisers pulling into the lot. I gave the police my statement, and they assured me they would go back to the spot I told them the sedan had been to take a look. They would try to catch the guys who did it, though with no cameras and no description of the men, I was sure they wouldn't be able to. I didn't even get the license plate number, though at the time of my panic the thought never came to mind until the police were asking if I'd gotten it. All they had to go off of was a dark-colored sedan and 2 guys with masks. After I gave my statement, I went home and curled up close to my boyfriend the whole night, listening to every sound the house made in fear it would be those men arriving any minute to finish whatever it was they'd started. Since the incident, I haven't heard back from police about whether or not they've found any leads, and I'm pretty sure they never will. I'm just thankful I'm still here and didn't stop my car to get out. I'm not sure what would have become of me if I had. I still have so many questions that have no answers. What were they doing? Why? Was that blood on the inside of the car or just a ruse to get more attention? If it really was blood, maybe they hurt someone else. What would have happened to me if I decided to stop too? Needless to say, I won't be going on any more late-night drives to anywhere, and I hope I never cross paths with those men again. I have several Let's Not Meet stories rolling around in my head. I think today I'm ready to tell the story of my stalker. To preface this, I know there are a lot worse stalker stories out there, and mine might be pretty mild, but it still terrified me and haunts me to this day, nearly 10 years later. It was my first real full-time job after college. I went to school for art, but the job was basically an admin, along with a bunch of random responsibilities. At least once a week I worked in the warehouse, counting and organizing inventory. A coworker of mine started hanging around and seemed like he really wanted to be friends. He was very helpful with the job, having been there for a while and knowing the ins and outs of the company. His name was Tim. He was 46, lived in his mom's basement, and had never been married. He had a cat he talked about often and claimed he used to be a Hell's Angel. He drove 18-wheelers and thought they were super cool. He started offering to smoke me out on lunch breaks, which I would accept because, duh. Then he started buying me lunch, stating, "My friend did this for me when I was your age. I'm just paying it forward. One day you can help someone else when you have the money to spend on them." He knew all the local places to eat and would choose a place, suggesting what I should try. It was a mistake to ever accept anything from him. But I'm a foodie, and he introduced me to new things like Cuban espresso and burger buffets, adding excitement to my otherwise monotonous workday. Around that time, our friend's cat had several kittens. One of them was a beautiful tortie, Penny, that I knew Tim would love, so I fostered her for a bit until he decided he wanted her and came over to pick her up. She got along well with his other cat and was super sweet. He loved her and would send me pictures of her and them all together all the time. We had him over, my boyfriend and I, a few times over a period of about a year. He told the same stories over and over again, but we tolerated him because he seemed quite lonely. I made him a dating profile because he often spoke about how he wants to meet the one, but he rejected every single woman he matched with. He would pick their appearance apart on beautiful women who were in his age group, some even much younger. Now when I say Tim is an unattractive man, please trust me. He was gross, overweight, sweaty, had thick, coarse black hair, and a huge gap in his incisors that he would suck spit through after he laughed, licking his teeth. He had giant pores and moles as well, and he was just old. We did have many enjoyable conversations, but eventually I started to get the creepy vibes. For my birthday that year, he bought me a first edition of my favorite book after I told them this story about how I lost my mass-produced copy. I had exchanged favorite books with a friend who ended up losing my favorite one. Her book was Twilight, which I hated. He also bought me a necklace that was for cancer survivors, which was very sweet but also kind of really personal and awkward. Still, it seemed innocent enough at this point. He would show up with a case of beer, knocking on the door unexpectedly. We tried to be hospitable, but it started to get really annoying. However, I felt bad for him. He was always so overtly nice and helpful at work that I felt bad just turning him away. One day after we had lunch, while sitting in his truck in our work parking lot, he told me he thought I was the one. I reminded him about my boyfriend, and he told me, "No, he's not right for you. You're supposed to be with me." "No, Tim. You know I care about you as a friend, but I'm not interested in anything with you like that. You're making me very uncomfortable." "I love you. I can take care of you. Think of all I can do for you. I have this much in savings." "Please stop. This is getting weird. I don't like you like that at all. Please drop it." I got out of the truck and shut the door, but the storm was just beginning to brew. After he confessed his love for me, I told my husband, then boyfriend, everything. He had warned me, and he reminded me how he called it, how he always knew this would happen, that Tim just gave off creepy vibes. I shouldn't have accepted all those gifts. He was totally right, and I felt sick. I started putting distance between Tim and I, while still being kind and sociable at work. I told my husband everything, though. Tim would call me over and over again, even though I always ignored it, until one night we finally got sick of it. I answered the phone and told him to stop calling me. He was crying and begging. My boyfriend snatched the phone, told him to fuck off, and hung up. That's when the threats began. He would call and leave voicemails about how he couldn't stand to look at Penny, how he was going to take her in the woods and kill her, or he could just let her be free to be eaten by wild animals since she was still so small. He said she reminded him of me, and that he hated her as much as he hated me, that he wanted to bash her brains in. I started to call in sick to work. I didn't want to see him. He ignored me deliberately, which I appreciated. He wouldn't look at me and acted normal besides his sudden coldness towards me. Seeing him was awful. I ended up getting laid off. Tim had other coworkers try to contact me on his behalf, people reaching out telling me I needed to call him, that he's hurt by my sudden leaving. I would get calls from random phone numbers in my area, and it would always be Tim. I would hang up as soon as I heard him say hello. I ended up changing my phone number, and we moved across the country. It was maybe a year later. Somehow he found my new number and called again, leaving this huge voicemail. He said he had found the one, but also he was dying. I can't remember how or why he was dying. It's all hazy now, but he needed this innovative technology or surgery or some such that happened to only be available in my town, in my state, 1,000 miles away from where he lived and where we'd worked together a year before. He wanted to meet up. He was excited to catch up and introduce me to his pregnant fiancée, and also he needed my new address. At this time, I was pregnant with my first and only child. Tim said his fiancée was pregnant too, that we would be parents at the same time. At that moment, I blocked every single person I had ever known from that town on Facebook, every single person that knew Tim, that he could have gotten information from. I changed my phone number again as well. Nightmares started of him showing up in the middle of the night, having somehow found us, of him carrying a case of beer, banging on the door, sucking spit through his teeth. I felt like he wanted to find me so he could get back at me somehow. Looking back, he was a total incel. I don't know if any of his story was true, or what his plans were if we did meet up. Anyways, fuck this dude.